Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning, and welcome to the ISO Board of Governors General Session meeting. Please note that all audio connections are muted until the comments section of the call, and I will give you instructions on how to ask a question at that time. And with that, I will hand the call over to ISO Board of Governors Chair Mary Leslie. Please go ahead.
Thank you, and good morning to everyone. And I want to begin today by congratulating our governing board newly elected chair, Andrew Campbell, for joining us. And also to point out that we have a very exciting agenda today. We have a new subscriber participating transmission owner model that we will be being proposed that I'm sure we'll be adopting. And not to preempt the CEO today, but he's going to have some really great news that quite frankly is historic and grounds for celebration regarding how many megawatts of new renewable energy we have put on the grid this year, and the amount of battery storage we now have. So with that, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our corporate secretary, Roger.
Good morning, Mary. Thank you. Let's start out before we get into the agenda with our roll call, and we can make it all official. Chair Leslie?
Aye. Present.
Yeah, Vice Chair Shori?
Here.
And Governor Borenstein?
Present.
Governor Edo?
Present.
And Governor Galitova?
Present.
All present and accounted for. We have a full quorum and we may proceed. Back to you, Chair Leslie, for the agenda item number 1.
Yes, it's my pleasure to open discussion for any public comment on any item not on the agenda.
If you'd like to make a comment, you can please use the raise hand icon located at the bottom of your screen. If you're on the phone only line, you can press #2 on your telephone keypad. Okay, at this time, I do not see any raised hands for comment.
Thank you. So seeing none, we'll proceed with a decision on the May 18th, 2023 general session minutes.
Some activity.
Roger, your microphone didn't work too well. Oh, maybe we just
Now
lost
it looks like you are muted, in case you.
I think we lost him completely here. It looks like no.
Yep, we lost.
Yeah,
him.
I think.
Hi, this is Stace. We've got a vote for the decision on the general session minutes for May 18. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Or second.
So that was Severin and Jan.
Yeah.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Aye.
Thank you. So next, we will turn it back over to Elliot Mainzer, our CEO.
Thank you, Stacy, and good morning, governors. It's wonderful to see all of you. Although I did provide my comprehensive CEO report yesterday, and we'll be providing more of a truncated commentary this morning. As Chair Leslie mentioned, I will reemphasize that important milestone that we discussed yesterday of having achieved over 5,000 megawatts of battery storage on the California ISO grid. This is, I think, a really important milestone for the state in terms of resource adequacy and the clean energy transition. And we've just deeply appreciated, the vision of the state, policymakers, and regulators to have gotten ahead of this issue many years ago, and then to all of the staff at the ISO and our many partners in the storage industry. It's just a great accomplishment, and we're looking forward to the next phase of that development. And of course, even greater technological and duration diversification in the energy storage patch. So wonderful to note that again. And then today, for the purposes of today, we have a couple of decisional items. We've got the decision on the revised competitive solicitation project proposal fee. And then, of course, we're going to be turning to the decision on the subscriber participating transmission owner model. And I wanted just to reemphasize a couple of things. As you all know, one of our principal focuses here at the CAISO is on transmission development and resource adequacy, and just ensuring that the state can meet its ambitious clean energy goals as efficiently and as reliably and as affordably as possible. And as we know from the 2022 transmission outlook and from the version that will be coming out next year as part of the update, we need to be able to bring on over 7,000 megawatts of new clean energy resources onto this system every year for the next couple of decades. It's a huge lift for the state. We need to be able to do that very efficiently. And as we know from the state's planning, its integrated resource planning and the procurement orders, very, very significant fraction of this resource development, both the power and transmission side, is going to be happening within the state of California. It's going to be a huge economic boon to California. At the same time, looking at the CEC and the CPUC and the procurement orders, the integrated resource plan, we also know that the state is going to need a certain amount of resource from out of the state, both in terms of reaching total supply and for the diversification benefits in terms of reliability and affordability. And the subscriber participating transmission owner model is our effort to work with developers out of state to help create additional optionality for the utilities inside California. As I said in my CEO report, this SPTO model can enable new transmission lines outside the ISO balancing area for developers who want to build and place their transmission facility or facilities under ISO operational control and use those transmission facilities to connect generation to the ISO balancing area. The transmission project to connect such generation financed through the FERC-approved subscriber process would be outside the transmission revenue requirement of the ISO's transmission access charge. So we feel really good about the work that has gone into this effort. It's been a tremendous collaboration, not only with Transwest Express and others outside of California, but tremendous engagement, stakeholder community inside California, a lot of input, a lot of engagement. And I think we've looked forward to presenting this proposal to you today for your decision, and also wanted in advance to thank Debbie Levine and the team who's been working on this innovative approach to new transmission development. So looking forward to the conversation, and a pleasure to be with all of you. With that, we're looking forward to the next step on the agenda. So I'll turn it back for the next step. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elliot, for that report and overview of our agenda today and the exciting news about how well we're doing meeting the state goals. I want to take a moment to thank Commissioner Bornstein. The normal attire of suit and ties has been replaced with, for many of us, Hawaiian shirts. That's out of deference to the fact that we are experiencing some heat here in California, and we want to encourage energy efficiency in your homes so that you will keep your thermostats lower because you're wearing nice, light, cool clothing. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the Governing Board Chair, Andrew Campbell. He will give us his report.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Leslie, for the welcome. And good morning, Vice Chair Shorey and governors. Thank you for inviting me to share updates on the governing body. My report's going to focus on the meeting we held in Salt Lake City on June 22nd. So most governing body meetings going forward are joint, with very few governing body only meetings. But with the June governing body only meeting, we took the opportunity to meet in person and in the Mountain West. We're thankful to the leadership of the Western Electricity Coordinating Council for hosting us in their offices. Thanks to the ISO staff for taking the show on the road. I know that requires quite a bit of effort and planning. We were joined by Governor Eto. His attendance and engagement was very appreciated. Just prior to our meeting, the Regional Issues Forum met and had a really valuable discussion digging into the scheduling timelines for natural gas and electricity. Panelists described how their companies manage the risks created by these uncoordinated timelines and what risks they struggle to manage. The RIF also heard a really engaging presentation from Avangrid, who's just one of the newest members of the EIM market. And Avangrid was really striking in the presentation. They saw just a dramatic overnight reduction in wind energy curtailment immediately upon joining the market earlier this year. It's a great case study of the kind of media value created by the market. At our meeting, we took a moment to appreciate Jennifer Gardner and her contributions to the Western EIM market. And then chair of the Utah Public Service Commission, Thad LeVar, provided an update on the body of state regulators. They're currently in an education mode. They're focusing on topics such as greenhouse gas accounting, which is important for states across the region. Josh Walters of Seattle City Light also serves as the chair of the Regional Issues Forum. He provided an update on the prior day's meeting. Then we heard from Danielle Osborne Mills, new to the ISO's infrastructure development team. She discussed transmission across the West and described some of the ongoing coordination challenges in the region. Melanie Fry, WEC's president and CEO, summarized that organization's priorities. And then we heard from Jim Shetler from the Balancing Authority of Northern California. He was representing the nominating committee. His presentation led to our appointment of Rebecca Wagner and reappointment of Anita Decker. Thank you to Governor Bornstein for serving as a non-voting member of the nominating committee. Also at the meeting, I was selected as chair and Rob Conziolka was selected as vice chair. Guillermo Bautista Alderete discussed how EIM benefits had reached $3.82 billion at the end of the first quarter in 2023. I'm looking forward to seeing the next quarterly report. And Anna McKenna ended things with an update on the policy calendar. So that concludes my report.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Campbell. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our next item, our first decisional item on revised competitive solicitation project proposal fees. And here to present that is Neil Millar, the VP of Infrastructure and Operations Planning. Neil.
Good morning, Chair Leslie, and thank you for the opportunity today. Before I turn the microphone over to Steve Ruddy, our Director of Grid Assets, I did want to just provide a bit of a comment about the decision item today. This is a relatively straightforward, in our view, administrative issue, but I did just want to call out the success of the ISO's transmission competitive solicitation process for projects that are greenfield above 200 kV and that have been approved through the transmission planning process. Over the years, we've executed, and Steve's team have executed that process 16 times, with 11 of those projects going to non-incumbent transmission owners, 2 to partnerships, and 3 to incumbent transmission owners. So a very successful rate of attracting new participation and competition in the transmission world. Now, with that, I'd like to turn this over to Steve Ruddy to walk through today's decision item. Steve?
Yes, thank you, Neil. And good morning, governors. I guess I didn't get the memo on the Hawaiian shirt, but I'll do that for next time. Thanks. As Neil said often, and lately more often than not, the approved transmission plan includes transmission facilities that are eligible for competitive solicitation. This is where the ISO solicits proposals to finance, construct, own, operate, and maintain these facilities. They basically become PTOs once they complete the project. So as Neil said, eligible transmission facilities are those that are over 200 kV and above. That are 200 kV and above and are not upgrades to or replacements of existing transmission facilities. If they're replacements, they go to the incumbent utility. Participants in this competitive process are currently required to submit a $75,000 initial deposit with their proposal to pay for their pro rata share of the ISO's cost of selecting an approved project sponsor. If the cost exceeds the initial deposit, the ISO currently bills each project sponsor up to another $75,000. Any costs above this $150,000 threshold are absorbed by the ISO. And conversely, if the ISO has excess funds, we refund that to the project sponsors. Next slide, please. All right. So management proposes to revise the competitive solicitation project proposal fees by 1, increasing the initial deposit from $75,000 per project sponsor application to $100,000 and removing the not to exceed cap of $150,000. To date, costs have approached but have not exceeded the $150,000 cap. However, costs have exceeded the $75,000 initial deposits in several instances. The ISO anticipates that going forward that it will need to rely more heavily on contractors as the number of projects and subject to competitive solicitation increase. This expectation, combined with the increased complexity of these projects considered for competitive solicitation and the need for special expertise, suggests the $150,000 will be insufficient to cover future evaluations. So removing this cap ensures that costs are recovered from the participants in the competitive solicitation process on a pro-rata basis. This proposal is not new to FERC. It is in line with FERC approved fees charged by a number of other ISOs and regional transmission organizations in their processes. Next slide, please. So there were no objections to this proposal voiced during the stakeholder call held on June 1st. And following the call, we received just one set of comments voicing full support for the proposal. Next slide, please. So management recommends approval to revise the competitive solicitation project proposal fees. These changes will allow the ISO to continue to access the resources necessary to effectively and efficiently run the competitive solicitation process, giving the expected number and complexity of future solicitations, and ensure these costs are fully recovered from our participants. And that ends my presentation.
Thank you very much, Steve. And are there any questions from the ISO board? Seeing none, we would like to open up public comment. Roger?
Yes. Michelle, could you check and see if there is any public comment?
Sure, and just a reminder, you can use the raise hand icon to enter the queue or press #2 if you are on the phone. And at this point, I see no one in the queue.
Thank you. And at this point, Chair Leslie, unless there's anything else from the board, we can go to a motion.
I see no hands raised, so I think we should go for the motion.
Excellent. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the revised competitive solicitation project proposal fees as described in the memorandum dated July 12, 2023, and move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy, but contain discrete revisions to incorporate commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Ann. Second, thank you, Jan. Governor Bornstein, your vote, please.
Aye.
Governor Edo,
Aye.
Governor Galitova,
Aye.
Chair Leslie,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Short.
Aye.
Thank you, governors. The motion passes.
Thank you. And now it's my pleasure to introduce the next item, the decision on subscriber participating transmission owner model, presented by Neil Millar, our VP of Infrastructure and Operations Planning.
And let me just interject, sorry to jump in here, but we did have a public comment letter on this from Sunzia, S-U-N capital Z-I-A, and that has been provided to the board.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you, Chair Leslie. It's Neil Miller here. Before I turn the microphone over to Deb Levine, and Elliot already did an excellent job introducing the topic overall, but before I turn it over to Deb Levine, our Director of Infrastructure Contracts and Management, to walk through the subscriber participating transmission owner decision item, I just wanted to provide some additional context for clarity about where today's decision item fits in the overall scheme of things. You will recall that the Board of Governors approved the Transwest Express participating transmission owner application in December of last year, with that approval conditioned on Transwest executing the transmission control agreement and FERC accepting the transmission owner tariff of Transwest Express. At that time, the subscriber participating transmission owner model was discussed, but it was under development and management did not seek approval at that time. So Deb and her team have subsequently completed the development of the subscriber model that she will be presenting today for your approval. This approval and the subsequent approval by FERC will provide the tariff certainty, allowing the resources to be marketed, and for Transwest Express to ultimately execute the transmission control agreement. I want to thank Deb and her team as well for the innovation and collaboration that brought us to today's decision item. So with that, I'll turn it over to Deb. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Neil. Good morning, governors. Next slide, please. So as Elliot has already mentioned in his CEO report, and Neil captured some of the other items, the subscriber PTO model enables development of renewable generation outside of the ISO balancing authority area to meet the policy goals for the state. So as you're aware, the CPUC resource portfolios call for out-of-state wind generation. Specifically, the 23-24 portfolios are looking for 3,000 megawatts coming out of Wyoming, wind coming out of Idaho, and then wind coming out of New Mexico. All of this aligns with our 20-year transmission outlook, and the subscriber portion is consistent with FERC policies that allow development of long-distance transmission funded by subscribers. So what the team and the stakeholders have developed a proposed subscriber PTO model that gives the option to build transmission lines from out of state into California and to allow the transmission owner to solicit subscribers who would then pay for the transmission project and join the ISO balancing authority area. Next slide, please. There are four major elements to the subscriber PTO model. The first element is the encumbrances. And encumbrance, in essence, allows, in this case, the subscriber who has already paid for the line to have a priority on the transmission line that they've already paid for. They're exempted from transmission costs because they've already paid for the transmission costs, and they're exempted from congestion. This is a structure we already have in place for all of the existing contracts. There's over 60 existing contracts still on the ISO control grid. And so this is how we treat all of our existing contracts. So the subscriber PTO model would not be any different. With respect to transmission costs, this is a new option for the ISO. In the subscriber, to the extent that the line is available and non-subscribers use the line, they will be paying a usage fee in order to use the line because it's already been paid for by the subscribers. And consistent with cost causation and FERC precedent for open access, the non-subscribers should be charged, and the subscriber PTO should be able to receive a rate associated with the use of their transmission line by somebody that hasn't paid for it. With respect to financing of the generator associated with the transmission project, the financing is going to be done consistent with the ISO tariff. The ISO tariff already requires the generators to upfront finance any network upgrades that are required, and then reimbursement is done by the existing participating TO for the upgrades on their system. That would be the existing PTOs in our current balancing authority area that would go ahead and repay the generator for their upfront financing on the transmission that's within our existing balancing authority area. The transmission that's part of the subscriber transmission line is obviously paid for fully by them and not included in the transmission access charge. If in the future the transmission plan decides that additional network upgrades are required either for a generator that wants to interconnect on a subscriber PTO line, or the transmission plan decides that we need additional transmission on the subscriber PTO line, those costs would be at cost of service and has to be approved by FERC. Next slide, please. The third component is how the subscriber PTO transmission line with generation becomes part of the generator interconnection and transmission planning process. So in order for the subscriber PTO to be studied by all of the entities that they're going to be interconnected with, they go through a full-blown transmission interconnection process, which we've gone ahead and expanded to incorporate both the reliability requirements and the deliverability requirements. So since both are already covered as part of the interconnection process, there's no need for them to then go back through the generator interconnection process and have the exact same studies done. So once they go through the transmission interconnection process, they'll be set as far as the generator interconnection is concerned. As far as getting implemented in our base case, typically what ends up happening is that the transmission line is incorporated into the base case in the year that it's going to come online if it's been chosen by the transmission planning process. Same thing with the generator interconnection. The generator interconnection will be included in the generator interconnection base case and the transmission plan in the year that it's supposed to be in its commercial operation. That allows the ISO planning to do its 20-year outlook that incorporates all of the generation and transmission that's planned to be online by that point in time. For the subscriber PTOs, though, we're going to put a higher bar in place. We're going to require them to go ahead and execute the applicant's participating TO agreement, have the generator execute the interconnection agreement, and provide a notice to the ISO that they have sufficient subscribers in order to proceed with their transmission line. We don't want to put it into our base case prematurely, assuming that the line is there, and start making solutions based on the line being there. So that's why we're putting a higher bar in for them to be incorporated into our base cases. The last item that is the element for the PTO model is the deliverability. And since the subscriber PTO is in essence being built to meet the CPUC portfolio, we're going to allow them to have the first option to acquire the deliverability established by the resource portfolio using the existing transmission planning deliverability process. So once they are eligible to be in a part of the transmission planning process that's already in place for all of the generator interconnections, they'll have the first option to use what they've been built for to meet the CPUC portfolio. To the extent that the subscriber PTO transmission line interconnects at an existing scheduling point, so a boundary of the ISO, priority will be given to the maximum import capability, or the MIC, that already exists at those points. So to the extent that a load serving entity is using MIC in order to bring generation in from outside of the ISO balancing authority area at those scheduling points, they'll have the priority over the deliverability of the subscriber PTO model. Next slide, please. So obviously this is a brand new service. We're trying to meet the needs of California. We're trying to come up with solutions that allow load serving entities to better determine the best fit portfolios. And we're trying to use the existing functionality that the ISO already has in its toolkit, and therefore have minimal changes needed to our systems. We could have gotten much more elaborate, but it would have required changing a number of our software systems in order to incorporate them. And we believe the solution that we've come up with is fair both for the subscriber PTO along with the load serving entities and the existing PTOs. Next slide, please. So with that, as you can see, this subscriber PTO model is going to go ahead and allow interconnections to other areas. The first one, as Neil mentioned, is Transwest Express, who came to us and have already executed the applicant PTO applicate agreement, which was filed with FERC in January, accepted in March. So they are all set to go. They're just waiting for us to ensure what the rules are going to be before they market their transmission line. Obviously, they don't want to go ahead and market something where they don't know what the rules are that their subscribers are going to have to meet in order to interconnect to get the generation into the ISOBA. It also helps with interregional transmission. It'll help with EDAM, resource adequacy, and obviously enhances resilience on the grid by having the additional lines. Next slide. So with respect to the stakeholders were very supportive. Everybody is very, very supportive of coming up with a subscriber PTO. There were a couple of concerns that I just want the board to be aware of, and we're also aware of where we came out on it. So there were a few stakeholder concerns regarding, to the extent this subscriber PTO comes into the ISO balancing authority area, it's going to require upgrades on the existing PTO systems in order to allow the additional flow of 1,500 megawatts, 2,000 megawatts, 3,000 megawatts, whatever it is in the CPUC portfolio to come into California. And the existing PTOs and some of the load serving entities wanted, in addition to the subscriber PTO paying for their transmission line, they wanted the subscriber PTO to pay for all of the network upgrades within the existing balancing authority area for that generation that's connecting to the transmission line. That treatment is inconsistent with the ISO tariff. As I said earlier, generators interconnecting within the ISO balancing authority area, they do upfront finance the network upgrades required for their generation, which the generator connecting to the subscriber PTO will also do. But then the existing PTO goes ahead and reimburses them over a 5-year period and is allowed to recover those costs through the transmission revenue requirement. Next slide. The two other concerns were
can I just want to make sure I understand that, or if somebody were to build a generator at the interconnection point of this SPTO with CAISO, they would be treated exactly the same as if somebody builds a transmission line to the interconnection point with the CAISO. Correct?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Just wanted to make sure I got that. Thank you.
The other two concerns were, and the first one came up at the last minute, is that if beneficiaries of the generation are not serving ISO load, then the out-of-state load should pay for the upgrades. And the ISO doesn't require any generator within our balancing authority area to tell us who they're serving. So there's no way that we could require that treatment on this one generator and not have the same treatment for the 1,000+ generators that we already have within the state. So we didn't see how we could be, that would be discriminatory. We didn't see how we could implement something like that. And then the last issue was that one of the stakeholders was concerned that the subscriber PTO should not collect the usage fee for non-subscriber usage of their transmission line. And we believe that the subscriber PTO should be able to collect it. It's consistent with cost causation and for open access principles. You can't use somebody else's transmission line for free. Next slide. So in summary, there were a total of 6 stakeholder meetings over almost a year period of time. We started working on this when Transwest Express first came in July as requesting to be a participating transmission owner. Comments were received over the various stakeholder meetings by 19 different stakeholders using 5 different papers. So to the extent that the board approves the subscriber PTO model today, we're anticipating finishing the tariff between this month and next month, and then making the FERC filing in September, hopefully with an order in November. And just to catch you up where Transwest Express is as far as meeting the conditions that Neil talked about to begin with, Transwest actually broke ground in June of this year on the transmission line. And if successful in securing subscribers, they anticipate that they're going to energize the line with the wind generation in 2027. Next slide. So in summary, ISO management requests that the Board of Governors approve the SPTO model. It's a very innovative approach to improve the connectivity across the West. The subscriber PTO is going to meet the CPUC portfolio requirements of wind generation from Idaho, Wyoming, New Mexico. We're starting out with Wyoming, and using the existing software functionality and tariff functionality to the most part that we already have included. The non-subscriber use of line would pay for a charge, and that charge will be approved by FERC. So it's not something that the subscriber PTO can just say, pay me X. It has to be approved by FERC, and it can be no greater than our existing TAC transmission access charge or wheeling access charge. So with that, do the governors have any additional questions?
Well, Deb, can we start with congratulations because to you and Neil, because I think this is really right up there with the other historic things we've discussed today. Really transformative. You know, I've been here 5 years. This is, other than adopting the day ahead market, I'm trying to think of something as big and I can't. So thank you for this elegant solution. And Neil, all your hard work. Yeah, because this is big, Elliot. It's great. Good job.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay. Questions? Further accolades?
I just echo what Mary said. This is really fantastic. Thank you, Deb. Thank you, Neil. Thank you, Mark and Elliot and the whole ISO team for providing this subscriber PTO model that will allow us to have access to renewable resources that can meet the requirements for California. I mean, great integration in the West, allowing renewables to meet and exceed expectations. I watch the ISO app every day and congratulations. A couple of weekends ago, we were at 98% again, and this will allow us to get to 90%, 98, 100% for longer hours and get us closer to that 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, every hour of every day goal that we have. So thank you. This is really great.
Thank you.
Yeah, congratulations. This is great. I'm wondering, how do other ISOs handle this? I don't think I read that in the memo, and I'd be curious to understand it.
Actually, there's no other ISO that has started to do this in the U.S. We're again the leader in trying to develop. You know, FERC put in place the policies that allow for subscriber development of transmission and usage, but nobody's taking advantage of it for this.
So it's not that outside of ERCOT, it's not that the other ISOs don't have situations like this, I assume, because you could certainly see development of lines outside of the ISO areas. They just haven't. Has anybody elsewhere in the world done something like this?
I don't know, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
I don't
Thank
know if Neil knows.
I don't know either.
We'll do some research for you on that, Severin.
Well, don't spend a lot of time
Yeah.
on it, but I am curious. I mean, it's always worth learning if somebody's already gone down the road.
Well, isn't this also a great example, Elliot, of collaboration between the CPUC and the ISO getting to the California RA? Because, you know, with unless you had stepped up and gotten us there, Devin, Neil, and Elliot, you know, the RA requirement of the CPUC is as good as your ability to integrate it. I mean, in fairness, right?
Yeah, I think in general, the collaboration with the CPUC and the Energy Commission has been central, and also these conversations that we've been having around our transmission planning and even this model have also even broadened out the relationship with the other local regulatory authorities, with the municipal utilities and POs and others that are embedded in our balancing authority. So yeah, it's really fostered a lot of collaboration, and it's also adding a whole bunch of additional, I think, extremely valuable interconnectivity across the West on the transmission side, which of course over time is going to continue to increase the value of our interregional market development. So it really hits a lot of the high points, and we're looking forward to the next step and hopefully seeing full subscription and seeing the line move to construction and full offtake agreements.
Right. Congratulations again. This continues the ISO leadership. Like, we were leaders with policy-driven transmission, and now this as well. So I hope we're successful. I'm actually confident that we will be.
Jan?
Yes, I also think this is a big step forward on a very difficult issue. We all know we need more transmission, and this model is creating some new financial and risk approaches that would allow transmission to be built. But what I wanted to confirm is that my understanding is that the subscriber is taking the new transmission line is taking the full risk of subscription. And I wondered if there's any role for the ISO in verifying and validating that the model, that the new line is subscribed. I'm trying to just sort of figure out the practical side of it. If somebody comes in and says, we're going to build a 1500 megawatt transmission line, and we want to connect at point X to the ISO grid, it's up to them to find the 1500s. The part I'm a little confused about is I recognize this is linked to the PUC work that's been ongoing about assumptions about, in particular, out-of-state wind. But I'm also assuming, or maybe I just don't know, are we the ones then that validate that we're getting the subscriber line filled with wind that's coming in accordance with what's going on at the PUC? Or I just am not quite clear in my own mind how that as a practical matter works. Although I think from your presentation, I'm taking it that the risk of finding and filling the line is on the subscriber, and it's up to them to go out and make that happen.
Yes, it's Neil here. I might just jump in first with some bigger picture discussion on that, and then ask Deb to talk about the specific checks and balances for the Trans-West Express project. But in general, and people have already been mentioning the policy-driven transmission framework we have in place. That policy-driven transmission framework is what's enabling the upgrades inside California to move forward, whether the imports reached our border from over the Trans-West Express project or some other project. So that's being developed through the policy-driven transmission framework, through the reinforcements that move forward through the annual transmission planning process. And that's where the collaboration with the Public Utilities Commission and Energy Commission has been so important on that policy-backed basis for those upgrades. When it comes to Trans-West Express, and I'll turn it over to Deb to talk about some of the particular checks and balances, but ultimately it is the responsibility of the developer to subscribe and once they have enough subscription to absorb their cost of their transmission line, they can move forward with the project. But it really hinges on them getting sufficient subscription to support the cost of the project and actually move forward. Without that, the project wouldn't move forward, and the ISO is basically kept whole because we're not supporting the cost of the Trans-West Express project itself.
So it's not like a Field of Dreams project. We build it and hope they come.
No, the developer of the Transwest Express project has gone through their own FERC open season
Okay.
to subscribe the line. But they would only move forward if those generators, the resources, get power purchase agreements and are able to move forward with the project and support the cost of the transmission. Otherwise, the project simply wouldn't move forward.
Okay.
Deb, did I miss anything there?
Nope, you got it perfectly.
Yeah.
Thank
I
you.
mean, I remember sitting here a couple years ago, Neil and Deb, really envying the fact that the Western Spirit line, the New Mexico wind, had come in and it had been purchased by the CCAs and the municipal utilities, right? That was over a gigawatt, I think, 2. And at a time when we were struggling with 1,700 megawatts as a buffer, right, on load shed on the ISO grid, right? So this is a game changer, you know, in terms of yeah. Joe.
Oh, we lost Joe.
Joe's on mute, I'm afraid.
Excuse me. Earlier, you mentioned that there's a higher bar placed on inclusion of this project in the base plan. And is that one of the checks or balances that Neil's referring to in terms of ensuring that there's adequate subscription to move forward?
Yeah. And in
Thank you.
addition to that, they have to provide quarterly reports of the status of the project, and there's all sorts of balances we have in place.
Yeah, very good. Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I think everyone's spoken on the board. Are there any additional thoughts from the board at this time? No? Okay, great. Then we'll move on to public comment.
Okay, we do have someone in the queue. I will go ahead and unmute your line and then please state your name and affiliation before you ask a question or comment.
This is Dave Fuller from Transwest Express. First, I'd like to thank the ISO board for allowing us to participate today. And I'd really like to thank the CAISO staff for the hard work and collaboration that went into developing this model and bringing it to this point. I'd just also like to briefly add a little. I think Neil, Deb, and Elliot did a really good job overviewing this. But I would like to add just maybe a little color from Transwest, and I'll be brief. Not only in the case of Transwest, not only will the SPTO model access new resources, it will access the best wind resources in the continental United States from Wyoming. And this was alluded to, but this model allows the LSEs and the ratepayers in California to leverage private investment to bring this resource to California and probably do it sooner and cheaper than other ways, and all without increasing the TAC. So, you know, to ensure these resources are available, we'd like the ISO to implement the SPTO model as soon as possible. That will allow California LSCs to understand the tariff rules in order to enable contracting these resources. So we strongly support the Board of Governors approving this model, and we think it'll be a huge step forward for California, Wyoming, and the broader Western grid. So I'll leave it at that. We'll be standing by if you have any questions for Transwest.
Does the board have any questions for Dave Fuller? No,
Not a question, but just congratulations, Dave, and congratulations to Transwest. This project has been in the works for a long time. I'm glad to see it having a chance to come to reality. And thank you for decarbonizing Wyoming and the Greater West. Keep up the good work.
You're welcome, if you can hear me.
Yes, thanks.
And we can hear you, and we're excited about this partnership, and we're excited that you're the first in. So thank you, Dave.
You bet.
With that, Roger.
Yes, if there's
Time for a motion.
well, yeah, we are ready for a motion. I presume I don't see any other hands from the public comment, so we can move forward. Move that the ISO Board of Governors approves the ISO's proposal for the subscriber PTO model as detailed in the memorandum dated July 11, 2023, and move that the ISO Board of Governors authorizes management to make all necessary and appropriate filings with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to implement the proposal, including any filings that implement the overarching initiative policy, but contain discrete revisions to incorporate Commission guidance in any initial ruling on the proposed tariff amendment. Governor Bowen, or may I have a motion, please?
Yeah, I'll enthusiastically move.
Second.
And I'm sorry, and who's second?
Either Severn or I.
Give it to Joe.
Yeah,
Joe, thank you, Joe. Sometimes I can't always tell the voices online here, and I will enthusiastically take the vote now. Governor Bornstein,
Aye.
Governor Edo,
Aye.
Governor Galitova,
Aye.
Chair Leslie,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Shorey.
Aye.
Thank you, board. The motion passes.
Thank you,
Thank
Roger. Now we'll move on to the next item, which is really informational reports. This is for the board to reference. Is there any questions regarding any of the informational reports that you'd like to ask staff at this time? Seeing none, this is going to be a happy result that Roger will be ending our board meeting unless there's any other business today.
It's always a bittersweet ending to leave everyone, but that is the result for today. We will adjourn and go on to the executive session at the appropriate time.
Yes, and the appropriate time, Stacy, for the executive session is?
Are we going to keep it the same or move it up?
Yeah, that's my question. Thank you. That's where I was going. What?
Noon. So if you want to move it up, let me know. But it's scheduled for noon.
Noon. Okay, how do, would everyone like to take a 10-minute break and then resume?
Yes.
I agree. Elliot, is that okay?
Yes, we can do that.
Okay, so then it's 10:26, so we resume again at 10:40. We're gonna have 12 minutes.
We'll be on. All good.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate
Okay,
it.
Bye.
Okay.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Perfect,
Bye.
awesome. Okay, bye.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's conference. Your conference has ended and you may disconnect.